I know you have an extra incentive with your FAL, but I hope that there's something about this topic that brought you out and made you interested. Let me tell you a little bit about who I am and where I work, where I come from, and you'll understand why I'm here, and then I'll tell you about what we're going to do tonight. Again, my name is Reid, and I'm the Education Director at an organization called Sexual Trauma Services of the Midlands. We have a slide about our services. Basically, Sexual Trauma Services is a nonprofit organization. We are not a government-run organization. We're a small organization. We are one of 16 rape crisis centers across the state of South Carolina. So every county in South Carolina has an organization similar to ours, has a rape crisis center providing services in that county. We at Sexual Trauma Services, we serve Richland, Lexington, and Newberry counties, and our mission is to help survivors recover from the trauma associated with sexual assault and abuse, and educate the community to prevent and recognize sexual violence. So some of the things that we're most known for, I guess I should say, is our crisis services. We have a 24-hour hotline. Those people who came in, hopefully everybody should have gotten handouts. And on the bottom of all the handouts, and if you didn't get one, we have extras here, which I'll just put up here and people can get them if they need them. On the bottom of all the handouts is our 24-hour crisis line. So 24 hours a day, anyone in the Tri-County area can call our hotline and get information, get referrals. Sometimes people just need to talk to somebody at 2 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, whatever. And so we have that service available to anyone in Richland, Lexington, and Newberry. We also have a 24-hour hospital accompaniment. What that means is, again, anyone 24 hours a day who has been sexually assaulted and goes into the hospital in Richland, Lexington, or Newberry County, the hospital calls Sexual Trauma Services, and we send what we call an advocate out to the hospital. The advocate sits with the person at the hospital throughout the entire time that they're there, basically just telling them what their rights are, letting them know what's going to happen at the hospital, what's coming next, because it's a very confusing process. If it's a child, we may let that information to the parent instead of the child. We basically just provide a support system while they're there in the hospital. We also follow up with them within 24 hours, business hours. We follow up, contact them, make sure they understood what was going on in the hospital, make sure they understand their rights. Do they want counseling? Do they need referral? Do they need a shelter? Do they need clothes, housing? What do they need? And if they want counseling, they can do crisis counseling with our agency. Usually that's up to about 6 sessions or so, depending on the crisis that they're in. And then they can sign up for short-term counseling, but not crisis, just getting them out of that crisis and into counseling. And we provide counseling for free for survivors, up to 6 months of counseling at a time. We also have group counseling as well as individual counseling. We provide services to families. If it's a child, we would refer the child to what they call a child advocacy center, but we might provide counseling or services to the parent. So all different kinds of advocacy, personal advocacy, legal advocacy, counseling, all of those kinds of things is what we do at Sexual Trauma Services. What I do, I'm the education director, as I mentioned, so I travel around the state of South Carolina, and my job is to educate. I do a lot of education in schools, like middle and high schools. I work a lot with young people trying to prevent not only sexual violence, but dating violence. You'll see today that they're very closely linked. I also present in colleges, like yours. I speak to adult groups, basically anywhere you can think of. I go out and I try to raise awareness about the rights of survivors, as well as what the laws are, what sexual violence and dating violence is, and then ultimately to prevent sexual violence and dating violence in our community. So that's a little bit about my background and where we're coming from, I think. Just to explain the handouts, we will not be going through the handouts like word for word. You actually have 2 handouts. The colored handout just is to advertise that we always need volunteers. Because our agency is very small, we only have 9 full-time staff, 2 part-time staff, and a couple interns and graduate assistants. We have a very small staff to do a huge amount of service. So we rely heavily on volunteers to answer our hotline, go to the hospital, sometimes do presentations like this and other things for us. So if you ever know anyone who's interested in volunteering, you have this sheet, you can post it in your residence hall, post it in your wherever, you know, your sorority, fraternity, bring it to class, whatever. I'd love for you to pass this around because we're always needing volunteers, especially in Newberry County. The other handout is a packet of information. We won't go through the packet word for word. Basically, I just have so much I always want to give people that I am not able to give it all in one session. So I give you that. I would love for you to take it home with you, look over it. It has more information about dating violence and domestic violence, more information about our agency. So you have all of that there. I think it even has our website. So I'd love for you to keep that, and obviously we have plenty extra, so take them to your friends or your roommates or whoever. Feel free to pass those along. What we're going to do tonight is basically do a very quick kind of overview of what I call IPV, or intimate partner violence. Most people know of it as dating or domestic violence. We'll talk about what that word means, but it's kind of, you know, again, so much information, just trying to get some of the brief overview. We're just going to basically get the surface of stuff and kind of skip through a lot of things, just to kind of get a basic understanding. As we go forward, I am happy to entertain questions, so please feel free to raise your hand, ask a question. I tend to talk fast, especially as the class goes on, and I'm like, I'm not going to get through everything. So, you know, tell me to slow down if you don't get it, if you're not understanding. Feel free, and of course you're always welcome to come and ask me afterwards as well. I'm happy to stay and talk to people. So we're going to talk not only about what intimate partner violence is, but how big of a problem this is, how often it happens. We'll talk about this idea of power and control in a relationship, and what the cycle is like. What really getting an understanding of, you know, when y'all leave here, you'll have a better understanding of what a violent relationship looks like, because it's very common. I am out and I see thousands of young adults, young people, and adults every year. And what I think is happening, what I see is happening in relationships, and what I see is considered normal, which is really not normal. It's very unhealthy. So I want to give a sort of a quick look into what is unhealthy and what is violent and why, so that hopefully you can understand what the flip side is, and understand what is healthy, and also be aware of some of the warning signs and how to support someone, how to support rather than blame a victim of domestic violence or dating violence. So that's what we're going to do tonight. Any questions before we get started? All right. So, just quickly, this word intimate partner violence, the terms change throughout time. Domestic violence, intimate partner violence, basically is any sort of abuse that occurs in a close relationship. It can happen between current partners, old, you know, past partners. It can be a one-time single episode of abuse, or it could be like in terms of child sexual abuse, it could go on for years and years and years. And it happens regardless of where people live, regardless of how much money they have, regardless of where in the country they live. We hear a lot of myths about dating violence. Well, that only happens in that community, whatever that community is, X, Y, or Z community, not in my community. Well, it happens in everyone's community. I've heard of CEOs of corporations being in dating violence situations or domestic violence situations where you would look at this person, in this case it was a woman, high-powered, you know, you would never ever think that at home, you know, she went home and suffered the abuse that she suffered and didn't have control of her finances and things like that. I have known 350-pound men who have been victims of dating violence. You would never guess that anybody could hurt that person. So don't ever judge somebody and think it only happens to them and not to me. And I hope it doesn't happen to me or to you, but the reality is it could happen in any community. And there's lots of different things that can be included in this term intimate partner violence. So here is sort of a list of all the things, basically, you know, abuse that can happen in that close relationship. So we've got sexual assault, child sexual abuse, date rape, dating violence, domestic violence, incest, marital rape. All of these things could be included because it's, again, that different forms of abuse. that happens in a close relationship. We're specifically going to talk today, obviously, about dating and domestic violence. I will say dating and domestic violence, there's really no difference. The difference is maybe there's a marriage certificate. Usually in a domestic violence situation, people are talking about somebody who is married and or living together, but quite often it's the case where the abuse started before they were actually married. So the signs are the same, the symptoms are the same, the effects are the same, whether they're married or in a relationship without that marriage certificate or living together or not living together. So we hear about dating and domestic violence all the time. I mean, we hear it nationally, we hear it internationally, we hear it locally. We see it in the news, we see it in magazines and newspapers, we hear it in videos, movies.